Good morning, everybody. It is 9:30. We are going to get started. We believe our guests will arrive, but we are going to build on optimism. I'm Sandra Kurtinitis. I'm the president of this wonderful college, and I extend a welcome to all of you to our CCBC Catonsville Campus and to the fourth MACC Completion Summit. We learned, though, this morning that the world has lost a great leader, and no matter our politics, I think it appropriate for us to just take a moment of silence in honor of the man who has passed away but gave so much to the world, and that is Nelson Mandela. Thank you. All right, so our folks have been working hard to get ready to be your hosts today. We will feed you well. If you have any questions, you just find somebody who's dressed like the Maryland flag, like me, and we will answer your questions. Phones, please put phones off if you would, and we are looking forward to the arrival of Senator Pinsky, Delegate Kaiser, Secretary Howard, but we also do have staff with us today from MHEC, from the Legislative Services, and from the university system, so welcome to all of them. And also, I just want to acknowledge the 16 Maryland Community College presidents, hardworking, talented people who bring leadership to moments like this so we can stay focused on our state's agenda. So my job is to give you perhaps a little framing of what we will be doing today. We know we have some wonderful workshops that will be presented a little bit later, but I like to borrow that classic phrase, this is the best of times and the worst of times, certainly, to be a community college professional. President Obama himself recently laid out what he called, quote, an aggressive strategy to shake up higher education, unquote. Our own Senator Madaleno, when he spoke to the presidents this summer at our retreat, used the expression, quote, a decade of turbulence for higher education. And the chair of the ACCT board at a meeting last spring slammed her fist on the table and announced, the system is broken, it must be fixed. So all of you know very well that we strive to do the good work that we do every day on behalf of our students within a vortex, a swirling vortex of challenges and issues. Things like funding compression, demands for accountability, performance funding, financial aid reforms, an emphasis upon success as well as access. And of course, there are always those loud critics whose voices ring across the nation, who say things like, community colleges only use remediation as a cash cow. There are others who say, this whole notion of placement for students is out of line. They demean our AccuPlacer by calling it the $2 test. And I would just say, if anyone has never taught an honors student and a fifth grade, and someone with a fifth grade reading level in the same classroom, of course they'd never understand why these issues are important to us. If someone has never, at age 30, been asked to remember how to do equations, no surprise about why we do with our population, largely adult, largely part-time. We know all of this, but I mention it because we are in an age of accountability, and there actually is a best of times piece to this. And I'm sorry that our legislators are not here yet to hear me say this. Of all the states in our nation, we fortunate few community colleges in Maryland are blessed with a legislature and a governor who understand us. They understand our mission. They know the integral role we play in the P through 20 continuum. They know very well how we are connected to the state's economic well-being. And we're lucky because many others across the nation, and you hear this all the time from colleagues in other states, have been sorely challenged by strident changes that have been made by legislators. We, on the other hand, we have SB 740, and we're going to talk about that a little bit this morning and give you an opportunity to ask the framers of SB 740 some questions. But we actually, instead of having strident sort of fist-banging responses from the people who govern us, we have instead a rather intelligent list and a rational list of things that we have to do. And we created a slide actually for, whoops, went too far. Could somebody help me just twist this back? Yeah, there it is, thank you. At CCBC, when we introduced this to our faculty and staff at our fall focus, we created a slide like this to show we don't have to be afraid of SB 740 because in truth, the community colleges sit in the catbird seat. So yes, we have challenges to meet, but they are not nearly the level of challenge that our colleagues in Connecticut or in California or in Washington or in Texas must come to grips with in terms of a completion agenda. So we know who we are. We are comprehensive community colleges who educate and train artists and poets, as well as engineers, HVAC technicians, CNAs, accountants, teachers. We serve about 500,000 Marylanders each year in our credit and our non-credit programs, and I think the most important statistic that we have to offer is that 95% of our graduates will remain to live and work right here in our communities. They buy houses, they have children, they join the PTA, they pay taxes. So when I think about what we're going to be discussing today and what really, truly, we have been discussing now for at least a year at our community colleges, what we know is that there is no sector of higher education that does more with less. And perhaps because of this stricture, when it comes to innovation and direct responsiveness to market needs and legislative demands, there is no sector in higher education in Maryland that is as flexible and resilient as we are. So, believing that community colleges count, your presidents, all 16 community college presidents back in 2009, did a very brave thing. We all stood up and we signed a document. We all put our names on a document called A Promise to Act. I'm not sure anybody even has a copy of that except maybe me. But the truth is, in that document, we said, we're here for completion. You bet we're going to pay attention to completion. But we need to have completion defined broadly, not just that little number of degrees of first-time, full-time students measured by iPads. You know our broad definition. It's almost an anachronism now to say it to a group of folks who are already in the choir. Degrees, certificates, transfer, and workplace certifications. But across the nation, that did not resonate. And what's really joyful now, people like me and your college presidents, we now go across the nation and guess what we hear other college presidents saying? Exactly what we've been saying. Guess what we hear our national organizations like ACCT and AACC now saying? We are all coming close to singing from the same hymnal. And that's what makes us strong here, because we have embraced the value of an open door is come one, come all. It's one amazing open door that leads to many interconnecting hallways. And there isn't a person in this room who does not understand the value and the benefit of that to the people that we serve. So we've accomplished a great deal. There's still a great deal more to do. That's why we're still here today. And when you really think about this, and I know at CCBC, man, I mean, we try to serve 70,000 students, about 70,000 students every year. That's a lot of people. And so we're fond of saying, wait a minute, we can't have any small conversations about these issues. All of us together, collectively, we can't afford to have small conversations about these issues. But given our collective challenge, we think that a gathering of like-minded, experienced community college professionals like all of us, we continue to find solutions that work. And not just for 25 students or 100 students who would thrive if you gave them a mass of supports, but for the thousands of students who sit in our classrooms across the state every single day. And again, I regret that our legislative colleagues are not here, because what I would like to say to them, and what I will say to them later, is we welcome and we will meet all of the challenges that they have laid down for us in SB 740. And like Rumpelstiltskin, we will continue to weave straw into gold. And the reason we can do that is because we have a secret weapon, and it sure ain't money. What it is, however, is all of you. It's the talent, it is the skill, the grit, the commitment, and the dogged determination of our faculty and staff, mixed with an extraordinary can-do spirit that I think you don't find anyplace else in higher education except at the community colleges. So I like to say, we know who we are, we know what we have to do. We are democracy's colleges. We have promises to keep to our legislators, to our governor, to our students, to our business colleagues, to our communities. And I would put money on the fact that the Maryland community colleges will continue, as we have already, to take the lead in the nation to show how it is done to keep the magic of an open door and the promise that lies within it that leads to a bright future. 500,000 Marylanders just can't be wrong. And one of the best ways I like to illustrate this as I close out my comments is to borrow a phrase from a man who's near and dear to us, Coach John Harbaugh. When the Ravens won the Super Bowl last year, I remember that guy saying, "Never perfect, never pretty, but we get the job done." So that's our Ravens, absolutely. Yeah, that's our Ravens. But it's every single one of us. It's every community college in Maryland. So this is an important conversation that we continue today. And now I would like to invite Dr. Bernie Sadusky to come up and share some thoughts with you. And I would say, you know, he is our executive director, the MACC executive director. He's in only his second year at this new job, but I'll tell you what, he's been so effective at doing it that you would think he was going on 20, not age, but 20 experience. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sandra, for that kind introduction. I guess what you did not realize is Senator Pinsky was in the audience. And Senator Pinsky, we were going to wait to your committee to ask you for money. But this is kind of the pitch. This is the first day of the pitch. But Senator Pinsky's been a great supporter of us, and he'll be part of the panel, and I think that'll be very informative. One of the things I thought I would do this morning with you is to talk a little bit about how this now known Senate 40 got passed. Actually, the correct terminology is Career and College Readiness Act. And that being said, it passed because 16 community college presidents said it is by far time and the right thing to do. It's not a perfect bill. Let's get it amended as much as we can, and let's get on with making sure that our folks get the kind of experiences that they need from kindergarten to higher education. And that's what the bill does. And I want to tell you that we were able to get 95% of the modifications that we needed in the bill because as folks started to talk through this, they said, you know what? This is how it's going to work. This is how it's going to work, and it's the right thing to do. Now, I know, I used to be a local superintendent and say, we're going to do it, we're going to do it, we're going to do it. And then the staff would go, how are we going to do that? So, and I have a feeling that when the bill was presented back to the community colleges, there was absolute agreement It is the right thing to do, but how are we going to do it? And that's what we're here about this morning, to make sure everyone is on the same page about there are best practices, there are some easy things that we can do, and there are some other things that are going to take a little bit of time to make sure that we get it done correctly. That being said, I want to compliment the legislature, because when we compare to other states trying to do this, they marvel at Maryland's ability to get this comprehensive bill done. Matter of fact, they actually went the opposite direction in many states. They took what I would call punitive measures against school systems. We're going to reduce your funding because we don't like the results. Too long in remedial education? No more. It's only on a voluntary system in Florida. Our legislature did not say that. What they said is, we're going to let it to the experts. The experts are the school presidents, the faculty. Those are the people who know best. We're going to pass broad concepts, but in the end, the logistics, how we get it done, in a positive manner, with equitable funding, and we had funding last year, and thank you very much. We're going to get this done, not you against us, but together. And that was, I think that is the strength of Maryland, and that's the strength of 740, although I'm corrected by the governor's office every time I use that. Now, superficially, the bill, if you will, breaks down the silos. And it says, you know, K-12, you got to talk to those people in community colleges. And we've always talked, but have we really talked? You know, you have to talk to the university system. Well, we've always talked. But were both sides listening? And the answer is, they are now. We now have partners. So the silo effect is broken down. But if we were to say that that is the only result of Senate Bill 740, we would be misinterpreting why it happened, and the results that we expect. Legislators in some states, and some in this state, see it as an accountability measure. K-12 says, my God, we're so accountable, how much more can we be accountable? Community colleges presidents say, look at our past record of how we've increased those degrees and certification. How much more can we be accountable? So, but it's superficial. It's superficial because it's much more than that. So why did it really pass? What was the driving force to make sure it passed? Well, I've got a couple of slides. And the first thing is, within the United States, there are some driving forces nationally, and you might say, well, but I don't know how that happened. Okay, I'm sorry, I used that. All right, let's see. Okay, there are some, you might say, well, that's going on in the nation, not Maryland. Wrong. Ladies and gentlemen, within the United States, income inequality has been rising. You might say, so what does that mean? For the very first time in the last 10 years in the state of Maryland, students coming to school, coming to elementary school, kindergarten, have retracted in their readiness. Why? Because their parents can't send them to formal daycare. They're putting them in the grandmother, and those are all very secure and so forth. But when we measure students' readiness to read and learn, they need that pre-K experience. And we've had our organizations having, because of funding, retract from that. And then if we talk about who comes to us, ability to access post-secondary education, what are we going to do? Are we going to leave the lowest portion out? Folks, we can't do that. This is not a country for some. This is a country for all. And if we are going to be successful as a country, then we have got to make sure that all parts of our population have access to this. But when we see income inequality, these folks cannot access the same services that we have and that we take for granted. Look, education is the key. It is by far the kee. for all segments of the population. And if we look at disaggregated data more, the top 5% of the people are going, what's the problem? But when we look at the bottom 20%, and they take home 3% of the wealth, folks, we cannot have a country of have and have-nots. And the key, the roadmap to get there is through education. It is through our doors for what we hope is a quality of life. And it even gets worse, if you will. I mean, I think the United States, the envy of the rest of the world, instead of being the most equal in the distribution of wealth, we have the third highest level of income inequality. How are we ever going to compress that for all of our citizens? And the answer is, it's going to be education, and it's going to be expedited education. Take a look at disaggregated data. 20% less for African American families, 18% of that for Latinos. Folks, we have a problem of all of our population. At one time, it was expected that the next generation, your children, would be more prosperous than you are. We've reversed that direction now, folks. We're going in the wrong direction. There's not an assumption that the next generation will be as affluent or more affluent. So, college grads, certificated folks, in the last recession, those folks that were affected the most were folks who had high school as their terminal degree or less. And the fact is, the unemployment reflected 2 times as many males as females that were unemployed, and the majority of those people unemployed were those folks with a high school or less. So the question is, are we smart enough not to repeat that as we look forward? And I'm just going to skip through that. So what happened? Why did it happen? What's really going on? Well, we have high-skilled occupations, traditional middle-skill occupations, and low-skill occupations. And if you watch 60 Minutes and talk about robotics, moving, and the jobs that were middle class in manufacturing being automated, then we find out that what we recognize as the traditional middle school occupations are not there, or they're minimizing the ability to be a part of that middle school occupation. And if we look at it more dramatically, we find out that 79% of the jobs now, I mean, you at one time in 1970, high school diploma, you can go down to Bethlehem Steel, you go to a number of manufacturing plants, you are in middle-class America. Look at the drop. Look at the need for that middle skill and the increasing need for the highly skilled worker. So, what about Maryland? Because those are kind of national. Currently, folks, we have 108,000 unfilled jobs, and we have a 6.6% unemployment rate. What's the mismatch? 39% of our adult population has a high school diploma. They're hard workers, but they don't have the skills. High school diploma, you are not qualified for the jobs of the future. You are not qualified for Maryland's emerging economy. So when we look at what was the real essence of college and career readiness is to make sure that education is directly related to workforce development, directly related to economic development, and I would argue directly related to the quality of life that you and I enjoy in this state. So, the challenge is not just the implementation logistics and the practical how are we going to get it done of 740. It is about developing a highly educated workforce, analytical skills, problem-solving skills, and creativity. And you might say it's going to take time. 740 says we really don't have time. We need to expedite the development process. Some might even say it's a race. Others would argue that education is not a race. Ladies and gentlemen, it is an economic race. And we don't have time. We don't have abundant resources. But we do have a willingness, a creativity, and a drive in our community colleges to make it work. It is embracing. It is embracing. We need to put this on the bulletin boards as we drive into Baltimore. The new minimum for educational attainment is a post-secondary experience, whether it's the degree or certification. Ladies and gentlemen, it's about accurately communicating the issue of economic survival. We are an entitlement society. We think things just fall to us. We got to make it work. It's about accurately counseling our future and existing workforce to economically beneficial careers. It is about the reemergence of Maryland's middle class. It's about the quality of life. President Clinton, and I won't finish it, he said, it's all about the economy. I'll drop the last word. All right? It's all about the economy. So 740 defines our collective responsibilities to meet the challenges of education, workforce, economic development. Folks, Maryland has embraced the notion of being number one educationally. However, the real test is our ability to make Maryland the nation's leading economic engine. So hopefully you get an understanding beyond the superficial language of why of 740, of the reality of why we needed 740 and why our presidents were so dedicated to making it work in Maryland. So I think we have some folks who are going to talk about a number of the issues in 740. And I've dreamed this bill. I've lived this bill. And one thing I can tell you, it is absolutely the best thing that we've seen happen. I know it's frustrating for some of you people, but collectively, government, education, we're going to get this done. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernie, for all the good work that you do. And Sandra, thank you so much to you and your staff for today's summit. I love your spirit, and I love the Maryland colors, and I'm always impressed by the good work that you do. And thank you for hosting us for the third year in a row. So you know we'll be asking you about next year. Okay. I would like our panelists to come up and take a seat. And thank you to all of you for being here today. I know this is a very busy time of year. I'm sure our faculty are sitting here thinking, I have so much work to do with finals, and our staff's thinking I have late registration we have to be worried about, and all those other sorts of things. But I hope today that you'll just take a moment to stay focused on the topic at hand. A lot of work has gone into the presentations that you're about to see this afternoon, and I think that at the end of the day, we'll come together with a better knowledge of what is happening statewide and some best practices that are happening, and we'll learn from each other. So the summits have been extremely beneficial in enhancing college completion at all of our institutions. And I know that you know that SB 740 was enacted in the last legislative session by the Maryland General Assembly. And in my experience in being in Maryland for 14 years, I have to say that this is probably the most comprehensive and forward-thinking legislation that will make a mark on our institutions and, of course, on the success of our students attending our schools. As has been noted, the legislation has been recognized around the nation as a comprehensive education reform measure. The legislation combines several individual K-12 and higher education initiatives from across the state and the nation, focusing on the education pipeline. So the ultimate intent of the legislation, as Bernie said so eloquently, is to enhance the educational experience of Marylanders and prepare the workforce for the future. So you may know that the key sponsors of the legislation were the 4 education subcommittee chairs in the Maryland General Assembly, and they were Senator Richard Madaleno from Montgomery, Senator Paul Pinsky is with us today from Prince George's County, Delegate John Bohannon from St. Mary's, and Delegate Ann Kaiser, also from Montgomery, who is also part of our panelists. In addition to Senator Pinsky and Delegate Kaiser, today we have Dr. Danette Howard as part of our panelists. She is the Secretary of the Maryland Higher Education Commission. So I'd like to share some background on information on each of our panelists before we begin. Senator Pinsky, representing Prince George's County, became a member of the Maryland Senate in 1994 after serving 2 terms in the House of Delegates. He serves on the Education, Health, and Environmental Affairs Committee. Senator Pinsky is recognized as a leader in state education policy and serves as chair of the Education Subcommittee. He has initiated Maryland's National Board Certification Program, a rigorous process to recognize outstanding educators, authored legislation to provide state oversight over for-profit colleges and online colleges that enroll Maryland students, and sponsored the state's landmark college and career readiness legislation. Senator Pinsky is a strong advocate for a clean environment and chairs the Environment Subcommittee. Senator Pinsky taught high school history for 20 years and currently is a teachers union organizer with an affiliate of the Maryland State Education Association. Next, we have Delegate Ann Kaiser in her 3rd term as member of the Maryland House of Delegates, representing the 14th District in Maryland and Montgomery County. Delegate Kaiser was born in Washington, D.C. and grew up in Rockville, Maryland. She earned her bachelor's degree in political science from the University of Chicago, as well as 2 master's degrees, one in public policy and the other in educational studies from the University of Michigan. In the House, Delegate Kaiser is a member of the Ways and Means Committee, serving as chair of the influential Education Subcommittee. In addition, she is the chair of the 24-member Montgomery County House Delegation. She is also honored to be the vice chair of the 98-member House Democratic Caucus. They are joined by Maryland Higher Education Commission Secretary Dr. Danette Howard, who was also instrumental in the implementation of SB 740. Dr. Howard was appointed Secretary of Higher Education in June 2012. In this role, she serves as Chief Executive of the Maryland Higher Education Commission, the state's post-secondary education coordinating agency. She provides leadership for the state's $110 million financial aid program, $110 million financial aid program, oversees the approval of new academic programs and institutions seeking to operate in Maryland, and advises the governor and legislators on higher education policies and initiatives. Before assuming her current role, Dr. Howard served as MHEC's interim secretary and director of research and policy analyst. Prior to joining MHEC, Dr. Howard served as the assistant director of higher education policy at the Education Trust, an organization committed to closing achievement gaps at all points along the education pipeline. As you saw from Bernie's presentation, a lot of the slides were from the Education Trust. Dr. Howard earned her bachelor's degree from Howard University. She also received her master's degree from Harvard Graduate School of Education and her PhD in higher education policy from the University of Maryland, College Park. Please join me in welcoming all of our panelists. So let me explain the process. We're going to ask the panel to address a few pre-planned questions that are designated to really help facilitate discussion on the topic of completion. And at the end, you in the audience will have an opportunity to ask the panelists questions about SB 740. So without further delay, let's begin by asking the first question, and it is this. And we'll begin the question once I ask it with Senator Pinsky. So the first question is, student debt is the #1 reason students stop attending college. Community colleges are well aware that increases in tuition have a direct effect on enrollment and therefore have minimized tuition increases and raised millions through their foundations in an effort to increase financial aid. Even with these measures, the need for financial aid, particularly for part-time students, increases each year. Will there be an attempt by the General Assembly to address these issues?
First of all, let me offer a disclaimer. I did not bring my checkbook, or did the governor offer the checkbook of the state treasury? There are a lot of needs in the state. I think we all understand student debt has taken over everything for students, and debt, I think it's greater than mortgages now, I believe. Yes, there will be an attempt. Someone will raise that issue. What is the outcome? Very unclear. We thought we had overcome a structural deficit. Income tax revenue, sales tax revenue, they're all down. Last I heard, it's about a $500 million shortfall. So there are going to be a lot of needs and asks that take place. Whether there's a significant change in funding for community colleges and four-year colleges, it remains to be seen. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that we're going to relieve that debt, inject more money to raise salaries for staff who greatly need it at the two-year and four-year institutions. I hear that frequently. We want to have the top quality and retain people. But whether that influx of new money takes place this session, really can't tell you on that one. So I'm going to make it short and sweet on that one.
Great. Delegate Kaiser.
Thank you. I'll certainly echo Senator Pinsky's comments about the tough economic times, and we all know that the idea behind the College and Career Readiness Act was this idea of this 55% goal that our high school graduates would make it to college prepared for the workforce. And we in the legislature have long supported different types of scholarships, and the real irony of the tough economic times is that as there are more needs across the state, including more needs for financial aid, there's also, the state is stretched even more thin to support some of those needs. So I expect, like Senator Pinsky, that there will be those efforts. I would like to support them. I look forward to hearing what Secretary Howard has to say, what might be coming from the administration. I certainly think it's one of the things that we have to be doing, and really looking long-term of what we're really trying to do as a state and what our vision is, realizing how many more people we want going into the pipeline, two-year schools, vocational training, and four-year schools, that we have to understand that we have to restructure things and make college even more affordable.
Dr. Howard.
Sure. First of all, I'd like to say thank you for the opportunity to be here and to really address our community college partners about this very important piece of legislation. I'd actually like to approach that question a little differently than the legislators, and that is that I think that the bill that we're here to discuss today, or actually the law now that we are here to discuss today, actually went a very long way toward addressing some of our student debt concerns, and let me tell you why I think that's the case. A number of the provisions in this bill are designed to make sure that students who start higher education are able to get through more quickly, are able to accumulate a significant amount of credits before they even get to our campus doors through the dual enrollment provisions of the bill. The bill is designed to make sure that our students get through their remedial courses more quickly, so they aren't spending unnecessary time and money and financial aid on the remedial courses. And we know that for many of our students, they actually never get through those remedial courses. And so this bill addresses that. The bill also addresses the fact that many of our students were taking credits that, in fact, they didn't need. At some of our community college, students are graduating with 90 credits, perhaps, 100 credits. That wasn't the norm, but it certainly was the case. And when students are taking credits that they don't need, in many cases, they are racking up debt that they don't need. So I think indirectly, many of the provisions of SB 740 will help students get through our colleges more quickly and will certainly address the student debt issue. Those points notwithstanding, we continue to see a significant need in our state in terms of financial aid. Some of you may have heard that we've had a wait list of 25,000 or 30,000 students who were eligible to receive financial aid but did not. This year, I'm pleased to say these numbers are kind of hot off the shelf. But for the first time in 6 or 7 years, we were able to reach students with an expected family contribution of $10,000, whereas for the last 5 or 6 years, we've only been able to reach students with an expected family contribution of $2,000. So I think that we need to think about how we use the financial aid dollars that we have, how we support students with getting through more quickly, and how we support our part-time students, certainly, and then on top of that, how we can advocate for an infusion of more dollars to our financial aid system. But I think that all of those efforts need to be examined together.
Thank you. The next question is, during the last legislative session, the Maryland General Assembly enacted SB 740, which by national standards is the single most comprehensive education reform bill that has affected all segments of higher education, pre-K through 20. Looking ahead, are there other areas of reform you feel must be addressed that would enhance SB 740 and expedite meeting the governor's 2025 goal of degreed students?
I actually want to circle back to the substance of 740. It was briefly mentioned, and I assume over the course of the past 6 or 7 months you've been somewhat briefed. But I want to talk a little bit about what motivated me, and I think probably us, to move this bill forward. And Bernie talked about some of the structural issues of breaking down silos, K-12, community college, 2-year colleges, and 4-year colleges. And that clearly was an aspect of the bill. And the bill was structured as an omnibus bill. It was not a K-12 bill here, community college bill here, a 4-year institution bill here. Clearly reforms needed to take place in all, and they're interrelated. The more advancement we can make from the K-12 transition to community college and towards 4-year college will increase the likelihood of more students graduating with either AA or a 4-year degree, which was clearly one of our goals and our outcomes, was to try to reach that goal of 55% of students having at least an AA degree. The second part, and related obviously, was to have more students college and career ready when they enter the community college. And again, they're related because the more remediation they'll take, the less likely they are to achieve a degree. I think we all understand that. You know, in K-12, we added an additional year of math. Everyone told us people are not prepared because of shortfall in math. We say there ought to be a 4th year of math. That we have it in English, we should add it in math. We also said that we have to assess students earlier to see if they are ready. Will they need to take remediation classes? Or can they take credit-bearing classes? So we want to have them all tested by the end of 11th grade and then have some short-term transition classes in their senior year to hopefully get them to a point where they can pass Acuplacer and start getting credit-bearing classes. Now, to be very honest with you, that's a short-term and medium-term solution. It is not a long-term solution. I believe, and I work in K-12, that the advent and the implementation of the Common Core curriculum and the PARCC assessment with a more rigorous instructional approach. It's going to be deeper. Instead of a mile wide and inch deep, I think it's going to be inch wide and a mile deep, although that's an extreme. But that's going to take a number of years to implement. You're not going to see the results immediately. I think those students that start in 1st grade, 2nd grade, and have 10 or 12 years of that will, in fact, have gone through a more rigorous education and be more ready and hopefully less likely to need the remediation. So some of the bill we do think is short term. I don't want to call it a Band-Aid, but it is short term while we wait some other longer term implementation plans. The other thing which we know people are happy about is the transfer process of ensuring that 60 credits can go to a 4-year college, and the reverse transfer, that if students leave short of an AA degree and acquire more credits at the 4-year and then drop out, they revert back to the community college so they can get an AA degree. So they have something to show for all of those credits. We think that's a major step forward. We also want to work on bringing back the near completers, those people who dropped out a few credits short of an AA or a 4-year college, who, because of family, other responsibilities, finances, fell short. In our state, it's been sort of each college you're on your own to get those folks. There are some states around the country that have one centralized point and a campaign that's coordinated, unified, where if you grew up in Prince George's County but now live in Carroll County, we still want to attract you back. Or if you're in Garrett County and you're in Garrett County now and started on the Eastern Shore, there's one central point to try to bring these people back and recruit them, and hopefully, when the economy's a little bit better, to have some incentives to help pay for some of those credits that they're short as an incentive to bring them back. So there are a number of pieces to this. The dual enrollment, I think, was mentioned earlier. We want to have more high school students be able to take college credit courses while they're in high school. Some will take AP or IB classes. We want to fill up your rooms, basically. We want to keep students in school for the 4 years, but we want to make it challenging and instructionally significant. So we're trying to do many pieces in this legislation, and it's going to take some time to implement. Some have some cost to them, many do not. And there's some other 800-pound gorilla issues in the bill, which I'm just going to mention briefly, and that is the coordination of credits. We hear from students, I'm in a 2-year institution, and I'm battling the 4-year of what credits they're going to accept or not accept. We have a situation in the state where people probably know this, that the major system is run by USM, not necessarily by the state government itself. And trying to have a coordinated approach where the 3 credits they receive at Howard Community College or Montgomery College are the same credits that they will get at the 4-year college, and it's not going to be a battle royale for that student to get them or have to go through a bureaucratic mess. And we'd like to have it systematized, authentic, and efficient, which we think will help turn those kids who say, enough already, it's a lot of aggravation, I don't need it, and walk away. So that's not going to be resolved tomorrow. And just briefly, first of all, Bernie Sadusky did a great job during the process and the work groups on that. But in the room, we had K-12 and superintendents, we had 4-year institutions, USM, and those not in the private institutions. We had the 2-year community colleges, and everyone has their own interest. And getting those interests on a common place and the same page as much as possible was a bit of a challenge, both in the Senate and the House. My colleague, Delegate Kaiser, can attest to that. So we think we've solved some of the policy issues, and as I've shared with Bernie, and I think Ann has too, if there are tweaks to that bill, not major changes, and we miss something, we'll correct them. Okay, we're going to vet them. We're going to talk to other stakeholders. We're not going to just take it on someone's word. But if there's some small changes that have to take place, we're open to hearing them, having the discussion to do that. We also want to see some of this implemented. So we don't want to just put pressure on top of pressure on top of pressure. So other than some nuanced changes, I'm not sure in the policy field, setting aside the fiscal policy, the funding issue, in terms of these transitional programs, we want to make another big dent. That was a heavy lift last year, and a lot of people are still trying to figure out how to do it and what it means. So that's a long answer to a short question, but hopefully it will help.
Thank you, Senator Pinsky. Delegate Kaiser?
Well, I'll start with the short answer and then go with the long answer, and that certainly agree with Senator Pinsky that what I see coming over the next couple years will be more of the nuance and the tweaks and the fixes that we need to make. We certainly knew introducing this bill last year what a challenge it would be and how ambitious it was tying everything together. And as we were moving forward, they moved it a little quicker in the Senate than as we looked at it, people said, you're just going to make this a study, right? And said, no, we're moving forward with this. We'll make some of the pieces of it a study that need to be looked at more carefully, but we have to keep pushing. And it's a little bit out of everyone's comfort zone, but I think that everyone agreed with the overall goal of the 55%, and everyone knew that there needed to be a better link between K-12 and post-secondary education. So that needed to happen. And if you had seen the first draft of the legislation, you would know that we did make a lot of changes without, in my mind, making it less ambitious, but making it more workable. Through the input of MACC, through Dr. Sadusky and others, and through, as Senator Pinsky says, all of the other interested parties to make sure that it worked together. So we do appreciate all of your help then and next in the process in terms of what are the changes that we do need to make. We need to confirm, of course, that all of our graduates are ready for college, vocational training, or the workforce. And we need to create those better means to make sure that students are prepared and that those students are coming to you prepared. And again, as it was said, not needing to take too many remedial classes and really on a path to getting a degree and making sure that when they leave your institution, it's not just with 60 or even more credits, but they're leaving with their AA degree. I see the different things that we need to be doing. First is just fine-tuning and keeping moving forward. So we welcome everyone's input on those changes. And we need to follow through on some of the studies that are happening right now that came out of this legislation, including looking at what would those transition courses be in high school. And people said to us, why are you waiting for 11th grade to assess these students to see if they're career or college ready? And it's not that we're saying that we obviously should be ignoring the prior 11 years, but it's like that last shot of what's needed. Let's assess these kids, what's needed, what's missing, what can we do before they leave. So clearly, some of the reforms will be looking more towards what we are doing in K through 12, getting students to that point, so they won't even need as many of those transition courses. And then there's also the pieces in the bill that require more counseling at the career colleges, at the community colleges and at the four-year colleges, making sure that students have a clear pathway that they're on, that they're really going towards a degree and they're not getting excessive credits, and making sure that those steps are being followed through with and that it's working the right way, both for you at the universities and for the students themselves, that process is working. And again, just working with all of you to address those challenges and, finally looking at the monetary piece of where we can plug that in. Some pieces are less costly than others. When I think about the marketing campaign to get the near completers, to me that's not the best part of the legislation, but in some cases the most exciting part, that we're finally taking the step to market and look for and letting students know, as Senator Pinsky well described, you grew up on one part of the state and attended school, you live on the other side of the state and think, well, I can't finish now, and how much easier we're making it someone who started at a 2 or 4 year institution to finish at any other 2 or 4 year institution. I think that's really exciting, and I think a lot of young adults, older adults, getting that letter in the mail about how close they are and how easy it is to finish, what great help we're doing for them. And so I just look forward to, again, seeing over these next few years, seeing it roll out and how we can fix it and make it better. Thank you.
Thank you.
So you wanted us to speak about perhaps some additional reforms that we'd like to see come out of legislation. And I would speak to two broad areas. One, I think that we really need to more closely examine how we can support more students in getting credentials through prior learning and competency-based education, particularly as this pertains to the returning adult student population. We know that there are many students out there who perhaps started college and didn't finish, or who haven't been to college before but have many years of really impressive, credible work experience. And there's no reason that those students should not be able to translate some of those experiences when they can demonstrate competency and mastery into a credential or into credits that can lead to a credential. And I don't think that the student should have to force their way into an advising office to make that happen. That should just be a regular part of the advising process. A student should be asked if they have any experiences perhaps that could be considered for competency-based or prior learning. And so I don't know if we need to address that through legislation, perhaps through regulation, perhaps through some really intentional conversations with our campuses, but I think that that area holds great promise. Secondly, as I said before, I really do believe it's time that as a state, we revisited and more critically examined our financial aid programs, processes, and systems. We award over $100 million in need-based financial aid, but as you know, we have two main need-based financial aid programs. One is the Guaranteed Access Grant Program, and if you are a student with the greatest financial need, through that program you get tuition, fees, room and board, total costs of college paid for. But if you don't fall into that category, if you come from a family whose EFC is $50 or $100 or $1,000 more and you aren't able to get a Guaranteed Access Grant, the most that you can receive in terms of need-based financial aid is $3,000. So you can still be a student with great financial need, only receive $3,000 from the state, and there's still that significant gap that you have to figure out how you'll make up for that. And so I think that perhaps through legislation, perhaps through a really critical study that's conducted by the higher education community, we need to come forward with some recommendations about reforming our financial aid system. But I'd end by saying that SB 740 is a really great example of the role that higher education itself, the role that all of us who are at the campuses and in the system play in driving change. The senator and the delegate didn't just wake up one day and say, we want to make this happen. All of us were working on these things long before the legislation ever came to be. I've been talking about near completers for 8 years since I was at the Education Trust, and it's been my dream since coming to Maryland to see this come to fruition. We were all working on reverse transfer before the bill came to be. And there are a number of other provisions, redesigning remedial education, that we were working on before the bill came to pass. So I really want all of you to understand the important role that we can continue to play in shaping legislation. It's not just something that is done to us, but it's something that we play a very important role in helping to develop.
Thank you, Secretary Howard. And now for the final pre-planned question, and I know the audience will have many questions to ask. Given that Maryland's community colleges are open access institutions with increasingly diverse populations, as well as differentiated local missions, unequal local funding support, and a CADE-based state aid formula, which of the numerous efforts being implemented in other states, such as performance-based funding, statewide course numbering systems, and a variety of others, do you believe will be considered by the legislatures in the future? Senator Pinsky?
Thank you. You know, when you talk about open access institutions, it just sort of had me flashing on some of the PowerPoint slides that Bernie put up on the screen about the disparity question. And I think that is sort of is a sub rosa issue that can't be ignored. The disparity in income, the very wealthiest getting wealthier and the poor getting poorer and the middle class getting destroyed, has implications obviously in our work in education every day of the year. And it's happening in Maryland. Obviously, Maryland nationally has a fairly high income, but we're experiencing it as well or greater than many other areas. You know, and as you read and as I read all the studies internationally, how the United States is doing, one, I don't think it's as horrible as a lot of the press says it is, but we have one of the highest levels of disparity, and I think part of our situation reflects that disparity. And I think given that disparity, we're doing a pretty good job. And I'm in the midst of reading Diane Ravitch's new book, and I think she reaffirms that, and I would suggest you look at that in your free time. In terms of other issues in legislation, I can't help, because most of my time in life has been in K-12 education, there are some reforms being proposed in K-12 education. They have been for 5 or 10 or 15 years. But in many respects, I call them faux reforms. I think they're phony reforms, and they're quick fixes. Bringing people into a classroom for 1 or 2 or 3 years, I think benefits the teacher more than the student. I think we have to make long-time, substantive, systemic changes to get quality educators into education, to stay in education, and to be challenged while they're in education. And I think, unfortunately, the proposals and reforms getting most of the press are not those. They're quick ideas, quick answers that have no staying power. You have a teacher, you give a test to students, and you decide if they're a good teacher or not. They don't care about formative assessments. They just want to have a quick snapshot, a summative, because that's great for a headline. So while that's not directly to community college, it's indirectly affecting you as well, because it affects the performance of the children, young people entering your institutions. So that's an area of reform that I'm very suspect and critical of. It doesn't mean I throw all of them out, but they have to be looked at very carefully, and in many cases with askance. The performance funding that Doctor spoke about is an issue that's out there. It's clearly out there. I go to conferences all the time. It's being tried and tested around the country in various ways, shapes, and forms. The easy road is additional funding money will be based on performance. Those that are taking what they call a middle road is a small portion of funding will be based on performance outcomes. And then those that really want to turn things upside down, they want to take 30, 40, 50% of funding to be based on outcomes. And that's being met with lots of different experiences. There's not been a big rush in Maryland to actually implement that, but a lot of people are looking at it. I think USM has been a focus of that conversation. I think in some ways more so than the two-year institutions. But I think that's an issue that bears watching and looking at, and whether in fact it might be something that actually promotes innovation and effectiveness, or whether it'll be detrimental. So I think it's worth taking some time. I'm not saying it's the best thing since sliced bread or it's a disaster waiting to happen, but I think it's worth some time to be looked at. The numbering system, we tried to address that last year during session. We tried to actually include that in the bill. There are some stakeholders that didn't feel ready for that, and I don't have to put labels, but we understand some of the four-year institutions weren't ready for that. They thought it was too simplistic in a complicated issue. We think that has to be addressed. We don't walk away from that forever, and hopefully next year or two, that is an issue we come back to. And the study I referred to earlier on ARTSIS hopefully will give us some data to be able to move more rapidly towards a statewide numbering system, so we're all on the same page. There's no illusions. It'll help the transfer. We can talk about course content. So I think that's something that can't be ignored, and I do support that. We just have to do it in a way that everyone's on board. We shouldn't have foot dragging too long on that one, but I think it is a necessary reform we have to adopt.
Thank you, Senator Pinsky. Delegate Kaiser?
I have a shorter answer on this one, just starting with the idea, of course, that the open access is clearly one of the strengths of our system, as well as the variety and diversity both within our community colleges and between our community colleges. And the autonomy that you have should be protected, whereas as some of these reform efforts looking to this one-size-fits-all model. Want to continue working with all of you to do what's best to improve education in Maryland, and want to piggyback on what Senator Pinsky was saying on the statewide course numbering system. That being one more part of the transitional piece to make sure that the connection is there, particularly for the more typical pathway of the community college student wanting to transfer to the four-year college. And I don't believe too many people drop out because of the frustrations, but it is just one more frustration. It's just one more barrier for making someone move smoothly from one part of the system to the other. What I did hear from my own legislative aide who made the transfer many years ago, that the ARTSIS system was, yes, very, very clumsy and very ugly, but it did its part. But I think, especially today, with the technological expectations of students today, not just our youngest students, but our older ones as well, a greater expectation that the system will be easier to understand, easier to follow, and certainly I think that the statewide, course-wide numbering system will be one of those things that we do over the next few years, to just add one more piece to make sure that the transition and the connections really are there for our students.
Thank you. Secretary Howard?
Yes, so I have no idea which issues the legislature will actually take up, but we can get a good signal about the things that legislators are interested in by the studies that they ask us to conduct during the interim. And this year, I think my colleagues and I at MHEC have been responsible for about 13 or 15 studies that we have to submit to the legislature for their consideration. And one of those was on performance-based funding. But what I can say about our legislators, or what I found, is that they are very thoughtful. They want good data, good information. They don't react because something is a new fad across the country or because other states have adopted it. They really want to understand and know how this will work in Maryland. And so that's why they rely on good information and advice from all of us. Another issue that I know Senator Pinsky has a personal interest in is around online education and distance learning providers, particularly from out of state, and how we can ensure that Marylanders who take advantage of those opportunities are protected and are getting a very high quality education. And so that's something that we've been paying attention on and I know continues to be of great interest to the legislators. And of course, as both of our legislators have said, there's considerable interest not only in the arts system, but in what kind of system does the state need to better and best facilitate the transfer process, both 2 to 4 year, and as we embrace reverse transfer, the 4 to 2 year transfer process. And so there's not only great interest in that, but I think that holds great potential for our students if we can really get that system up and running in a sophisticated way so that we're no longer hearing that it's clunky and clumsy, as I think we've all heard.
Great, thank you. So now I'm sure you've been thinking of questions that you like to ask, and now's your chance, if for nothing more than to stand up because you've been sitting for over an hour. And we have folks in the audience with microphones. You can raise your hand if you have a microphone. Okay. Is there someone up? Okay, it's a little hard to see up there. So what I'm going to do is raise your hand if you have a question. Okay, we have one from Dr. Hoy, President of Warwick Community College. And if you'd like to direct it to a certain panelist, please feel free to do that as well.
Actually, this could be for any panelist. Clearly, the highest percentage of students we have in developmental education are in developmental math. And the issue is that we assess for competencies in Algebra 2. And I'm not really sure that we should be assessing or need to be assessing for competencies in Algebra 2. Currently in COMAR, it states that Gen Ed college math is equivalent to college algebra. Hence, we assess for high school competencies in Algebra 2. But many studies show that statistics is probably more relevant in many curricula, and it might be a course that's more appropriate for many of our students. Statistics does not require competencies in Algebra 2. So if we get rid of this requirement, if we can make this change and say that, look, statistics should be a Gen Ed math, and we don't need to assess the competencies of Algebra 2 for people who are going into statistics, I think we can reduce the number of people who need a second-level developmental math course and increase time to completion and solve a lot of problems with that.
Let me start with a very quick, short answer, and then I'll let my colleagues take over. Let me answer part of that. In the legislation, and I want to speak to that fourth year in math because I think it's relevant to your question, we had a long discussion of what math that should be, or whether it's a pure math or what. And after hearing from many people, including those kind of comments, and I don't have the actual language of the bill in front of me, we made it a generic math. So whether that's statistics or understanding Excel spreadsheet, we left it fairly general, and that's going to yet to be defined. But we didn't come into it that it had to be in Algebra 2, for example. Obviously, some students are never going to make that. So at least in terms of the fourth year of math, we tried to take that in consideration and leave it a little broader because of different needs and skills that are needed at community college.
Well, as Senator Pinsky was saying about the fourth year, when we were considering this legislation and all the thoughts about what needed to happen in that fourth year of high school, and of course the idea being that the students who don't take math because they're probably not doing as well in it as their average classmates say, oh, I don't have to take math this year, and they show up in college and haven't used the muscle for 15 months, and suddenly they're taking remedial math even though they had been doing really well in high school up through 11th grade. And then our concern that senior year was that it wasn't just about hard math skills, but what we called math-E, something that was maybe business math, maybe it was financial literacy, maybe it was an economics class, but really anything to keep the muscle going. But I think your point is also really addressing that we're using an old standard of thinking that Algebra 2 is what's needed for today's workforce, and that's not necessarily the case anymore. And I think that's maybe one of those broader discussions, and back to that linkages between K-12 and higher education, to say, again, what really is needed in the workforce of today and the careers of today. And maybe it's not the high-level skills we learned in Algebra 2. I would say the probability and statistics class I took in 11th grade has served me a lot more than Algebra 2 ever has, despite getting my master's in public policy where I needed to take econometrics and do fancy math and so forth. But I do think the statistics is more valuable. So I agree with you that I think we need to, it's somewhat of a cultural shift. It's not a huge issue like, oh my God, we need year-round schools. That's huge. But I mean, I think it's a cultural shift in its own. But I do agree with you that we need to reassess what is the math that's really needed in today's economy.
And I think it was at this very conference 2 years ago that Dr. Uri Treisman was the keynote and spoke about this issue. And I think that we've been having this conversation in higher education for the last couple of years, but it's time to take the movement more broadly and get others engaged and really get some traction on this issue, because I do think that because we are expecting students to have mastery at the Algebra 2 level, that is what's keeping many students either trapped in remedial education or from being able to progress through their coursework when they aren't majoring in something that requires them to have that level of mastery and expertise. So I think that as a higher education community, we need to begin to have this conversation more broadly with other stakeholders.
Right, thank you. Next question. We have a question here.
Good afternoon. My name is Brian Hamlin. I'm the program manager of the Diverse Male Student Initiative at Prince George's Community College. One of my big issues, and I want to know within your meetings, your sessions, what's the conversation like in terms of community colleges and the state of Maryland doing better in terms of assisting our graduates with career placement? I recently had a young man that graduated from Prince George's, went on to go to University of Maryland, got his finance degree, just graduated in May, and he's been unemployed for the last 6 months. And in terms of us selling them on the dream of getting that degree, both that associate's and that bachelor's, and then them not really being competitive in the marketplace, I know individual campuses have our career centers and we're doing all we can. Is there anything at your level of the game that's enhancing what we can be doing on these college campuses to increase career placement, to really turn these degrees into sustainable dollars so they can have independent living?
So I'll take a stab at this first. I think that's a great question. It's an important issue because when we tell our students that a college education is the key and then they can't get a job, that's a problem. And so we've been talking a little bit about this at the Governor's P20 Council as well. And so one of the things that we know works is when students have internship experiences in their field of study as soon as possible. So as soon as they declare their major, get them into some of those practical work experiences. And we also know that when students have those experiences and they perform well, those employers are much more likely to keep them on for full-time employment. So I think that's one area in the state that we could kind of bolster, is ensuring that there are better partnerships with our employers so that students get those early learning experiences at the employer site and then are better able to transition seamlessly into those job opportunities when they're available after graduation. So that's one thing we're doing at the state level.
I would just say additionally, I don't think there have been that many discussions in the House of Delegates in our debates or discussions on issues like this. And that's where it really comes back to my original point about seeking your input, because I think this is something we clearly need to work on, and I look forward to working on that with all of you.
Senator Pinsky? Nothing. Okay. Another question from the audience. We have one here. Mike Carey, CCBC.
Thank you for coming this morning. I've got lots of questions. I'm trying to stay on topic is always my problem. Yesterday I attended the Governor's Commission on Manufacturing. I've been going to all their meetings. A report was put on the table with 10 topics. The word community college was never, ever in the governor's commission on manufacturing. Now, that's not ready to come out yet and go to the governor, but too many times I see state initiatives come out, and the special role that community colleges might play are not there. Another example, while I think it's a great bill that came out last year, and I think we're heavily engaged in some way, is the EARN legislation that came out. In all these things, in my estimation, the community colleges have a special role to play. Often we're already engaged in things they're interested in, but we're never at the table in the formative stages of that with the state, well-intended state people who put these things together. So I don't know if I have a question so much other than to recognize that going to college in Maryland is much more than going to college to get your associate degree. We are educating the truck drivers. Today, in one of the buildings on this campus, there's laid off RG steel workers in a 6-month numerically controlled machining training program, who, by the way, couldn't find any state scholarship money to pay for it, but they luckily, because they're laid off steel workers, that was paid for it. We have all kinds of people completing wonderful things in Maryland community colleges at these various state commissions, whether they're DBED, whether the Department of Labor License and Regulation. We need to pay attention to those things. We had a retreat of the 16 continuing education, my counterparts, and recognized last month at our retreat that we are the educational part of the state for GEDs now. 10 years ago, it was the public schools doing that work at night. Now it's the Maryland community colleges. Getting a GED is the first step, and you go to college in Maryland now to get your GED. So I know we got to stay on the associate degree. I know credit certificates are important, but we're playing such a broad role. And I would just ask you, as you see other initiatives come out, whether they're from DBED, Department of Labor License and Regulation, or others, if we can be more thoughtful about the special contribution we might be able to make to help the state with their economic and workforce development issues.
Thank you
Sorry
for your
the
question,
speech,
Mike.
cousin.
Never. All right, Senator Pinsky.
No, I appreciate it. Let me give a short answer and then a longer answer. I don't think Delegate Kaiser and myself can speak for the Maryland government. We can only speak for our own efforts, and as you heard today, we tried to be inclusive and get people to the table, the stakeholders to the table, and hear from them, and do the best we can, trying to get to some consensus and find some solutions. They're not going to solve all the problems. In terms of jobs, and this gets back to the other gentleman's question of alignment of jobs and job creation, in terms of education fitting in with those jobs. I read an interesting article the other day by Bob Reich, former Secretary of Labor under Clinton and economist, and now the center of a documentary movie. And he talked about future job creation. And he actually started by talking about holiday shopping in the holidays. And he said that they expect that online shopping is going to go up by about 20%. And that means fewer people will be going to retail bricks and mortar establishments, which means fewer clerks, eventually fewer stores, which means construction. And he was raising the question of, are we prepared and understand the long-term implication of the shift to e-trades, as it were, and what that means for job creation? While Amazon's going to put up their new shop and have 5,000 new jobs, there are going to be many more lost because you're not going to have the retail experience. And many of the existing retailers using bricks and mortar, Target, those types, they're actually shifting to more online because they understand that's the future. And it brought home to me that we really have to step back in a big way and look beyond the weeds and the trees and maybe beyond the forest, that this is a major, major shift, not just in Maryland, it's a national issue, of course, and international, but that issue of jobs and job creation and what we're actually preparing them for and what jobs are going to be out there is a major, major lift, and hopefully we can do our small part in Maryland, but it's broader than Maryland, and it's moving quickly. That trend line ain't like that. It's like this. and it's happening very quickly. And while I'm not here to say we have to do all we can to retain those retail jobs, because they're not the ones we want to prepare our people for, and what you're doing in terms of instruction in whatever field it is, we want to have more jobs that are going to create and develop new experiences, new generations of whether it be manufacturing, technology, whatever. But a lot of transition jobs are, in fact, those retail jobs. Many of your students are probably doing those as we speak, so they can come to school at 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock. But even in not a long term, 5 or 10, 15 years from now, it's starting to hit us now. So it's going to add to that debt issue and the employment issue, and hit home, I think, for both the 2 and 4 year institutions.
Anyone else? All right. Another question from the audience? We have one here.
Thank you. I'm Trudy Cook-Turner. I'm the chair of behavioral sciences here at CCBC. And I really am so excited that you all came to actually talk about how this bill is being fleshed out and how we're actually seeing it realized. Dr. Howard, you made a very important statement I think that we need to seriously consider about how we look at prior learning experiences. And this isn't so much a question as a statement, because what is going on in this bill, in this law, is a realization of a lot of wonderful things that have already been in place, but I don't think that we've really paid a lot of attention to. Here we have an excellent opportunity to continue relationships, building relationships in the P20 environment. But I don't think we have paid a lot of attention to the fact that what the children of our students are seeing is the opportunities that they will have in the future to engage in our educational experience, and ones that are really positive and upbuilding and encouraging as far as the labor markets go, et cetera. So whether we're talking about preparing someone for the workforce or at least allowing them to have access through the child care centers for opportunities to see that mommy, daddy, whoever is going to school and making wonderful strides in for their future, how it impacts on that little one as well. I don't think we've paid too much attention to that. That's an enhancement that is already happening, but I don't think we're talking a lot about it. And so as we're looking at the intergenerational impact, it's one that is wonderful, and I think it's one that we should celebrate a lot more as we're talking about how this bill is affecting Marylanders.
Thank you. Any other question or comment? And if you're in the balcony there, we really can't see you, so you'll need to come down. Oh, we have one. Okay, we have a question. I see a hand raised up here in the balcony. Oh, you don't have one. That was this. Okay. Wasn't this. All right. Down here we have a question, I believe.
Right here.
Right there.
Okay, here we go.
Hi, my name's Ken Westery. I'm Vice President of Institutional Advancement here at CCBC. That's the fundraising arm of the college, and we all have that division at our colleges. And one of the things that we're charged with is bringing in resources, financial resources, to the college, and probably one of the biggest areas is scholarships. Scholarship dollars, financial aid, and everyone talked about the need for financial aid and that being the number one reason students don't persist and graduate. And a couple of years ago, I wasn't working here yet, but I heard about this program and I saw the impact of it. It was a state program. I think it was called PIP. I don't know what that stands for, but it was a matching program that matched dollars from private donors to establish endowments, scholarship endowments. Outstanding program. I think at most of our colleges, it helped us increase our endowments, and those endowments are now providing scholarship dollars in perpetuity for students. And that's a program that if the state could bring that back, that would be an outstanding incentive. And if you bring it back, make it eligible both for individuals as well as corporations and private organizations, because donors love incentives. They love the opportunity to establish endowments And if you give them a dollar for dollar match or 50 cents on the dollar for every dollar they put in, I got to tell you, it will help all of our colleges increase the amount of our endowments and the amount of scholarship money that we have available. So I hope you guys think about that. Take that back to the legislation.
Right, I see a lot of heads nodding, so.
Well, I think that program sunset just a few years ago, but it's great to hear how effective it was. And I think, again, this is where the higher education community speaking with one voice, letting our legislators, and to the extent that I can also let the governor's office know the types of programs that really do make a difference. I think that we will have a much better chance of getting those efforts reinstated. So thank you.
Right, next question.
Dr. Dukes, I see she's been waving her hand
Oh,
over
okay,
here.
there we go.
I guess now I recognize you.
From Prince George's Community College, and I want to thank you all for being here. And one comment, which is I'm certainly happy to hear that opportunities exist for tweaks, not sweeping change, but tweaks, and we'll certainly work through all of the channels available to us to make some suggestions with regard to that. The other thing, though, I wanted to ask a question about, and maybe Secretary Howard, it begins with you, is that as Dr. Hoy spoke to the need to rethink COMAR and language regulation statutes that we have there. We also know at the national level, we're being asked to rethink the reauthorization of the Higher Education Act. And it's interesting that we get emails, not from you, but nationally from some of our associations that say, if you have any ideas about change, get them to us ASAP, not recognizing that we're talking about a document that is probably as thick as I am tall. But given some of the work that we're doing here in Maryland, and both, I think, work that certainly is breathtaking as I talk with colleagues across the nation, what do you think about a role for Maryland higher education to play and having a partnership, concerted approach to what we might suggest for changes in the reauthorization of that act? And then how can we use our legislative muscle, both at the state level and then with the Maryland congressional delegation, to begin to work those things through that process? We talk about federal aid, state aid, and then federal aid. But one of the things we haven't talked about, quite frankly, is that we all have been impacted by students who were full-time, then part-time, then full-time again, because their lives are changing. And then all of a sudden, they get cut off because the federal government says, you only have this much time to use Pell if you were Pell eligible. And that has some deleterious impacts, I think, that we all can state examples of. And when you begin to add those up, then when you talk about near completers and reverse transfer and people stopping out and never seeing an opportunity to come back in. But I just wonder about, as a concerted partnership, 2-year, 4-year, the commission and legislation, how can we impact decisions that are certainly impacting all 50 states and the District of Columbia when we talk about the reauthorization of that act and some of the things that find their way into that act that are pet issues but impact the nation?
Sure. That's an excellent question, and something that I've been thinking about quite a bit lately, and I know the chairman of the commission has, Anwar Hassan, is the role that MHEC should be playing around convening and fostering greater collaboration across the various segments and sectors, so that when an issue is raised, it would be completely appropriate for MHEC to call together a group or to have an open hearing so that individuals could come to share their perspectives and views on a particular issue, and then we could go out as a higher education community and say, these are our recommendations, or these are the things that we'd like to be considered or more closely examined. And so I think that our doing that will move the state in the direction of having that closer partnership and being much more effective, not only with regard to the national issues, but even within our own state. I think that we could do a better job of of advocating collectively for higher education. I think that there is more of a role for MHEC to play, and we're certainly exploring that. Just to give you one example, I hope that some of you have heard that in 2 weeks, we're going to be having a hearing on some of the issues we discussed today, having to do with the caps that currently exist with regard to prior learning and competency-based education, and whether those caps need to be removed or reconsidered. Right now, there are only a certain number of credits that students can earn for prior learning and competency-based, and perhaps we need to revise our regulations. And the other is on institutions, our out-of-state partners, who have to get permission from the state if they want to offer a practicum or an internship experience in the state, and what impact that has on our students and other institutions. So this is going to be on December 18th. We've invited people to testify, but this will really be our first foray into doing what I hope we'll be doing more, Dr. Dukes, which is providing opportunities for our higher education partners to come together to think through some of these issues before decisions are made.
Other questions from the audience? We have one. Dr. Hoy.
Sorry to do this twice, but I was debating which question to ask, and you actually brought up the same issue again. It was your comment, Secretary Howard, about credit for prior experience, yes. And then you just brought it up again in the sense of a meeting that you're planning on holding. One of the issues I think still exists with competency-based credit is full faith in credit, meaning if we award credit for that, the receiving institutions that our students transfer to don't get that credit. And we may need legislation to make that happen. That is a critical issue for our students because they have to backtrack, take coursework that we've already acknowledged that they have earned credit for.
That's right.
And in many cases, they've taken advanced courses in that same discipline, and now they have to backtrack and take something else that makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. Okay. And there's no system currently existing in Maryland that gives full faith in credit that we grant, accredited institutions are granting for our students in these disciplines. So that's something that I really believe that needs to be looked at, and we may need to look at legislators to help us make that happen.
Great.
Thank you.
I have a question here.
I just wanted to add, Secretary Howard, that as you think about who to invite to that, the representatives of veterans groups, because they are really impacted by this limit, and many of them are coming back with learning from their military experience, whether they were on active duty, National Reserve, whatever, and they're bumping up against those limits, and that's a group that I know is very interested in this.
Thank you. And I believe the Maryland Association of Community Colleges has already said that there will be at least 3 representatives from the community colleges there to speak on these issues. So we appreciate that.
All right. We have a question here.
Okay. My name is Shonda Sampson. I'm a math professor at the College of Southern Maryland. I hate to bring up some money because I understand that the senator said earlier, I understand that that the situation is definitely tight. But I guess my question is, as we continue to say that students need to move through our developmental sequences faster, which is definitely a positive thing, that we make sure, I guess, that we have in our theological lexicon that we may need money to support those students because they may need additional tutoring to make that happen. So it might not be a lot of money, but some sort of program or something where they can get the additional tutoring, because we can say, hey, let's move them through the English classes. Let's move them through 3 math classes in 1 semester. What we say and what is possible for someone who's coming back to school after being out for 10 years may not be possible without having some kind of support, which sometimes means maybe tutoring or something that we can do to get them through, to assist them in getting through. So I just want to say that.
No, I appreciate that, and hopefully we can assist in that. It does call up some other aspects of the discussion around 740 last year, and that was using some other creative ways for people who go through those development or need some, either, if not all, some part of the developmental course prior to getting the credit-bearing course. And apparently some institutions are actually having students enroll in either the developmental course and the credit-bearing course at the same time. Or in some places, I think, and I can't remember where, or if it was one of the institutions in the state or somewhere else in the country, where they're breaking down some of the areas where the student's falling short into smaller modules and not a full credit, so they can get that information and knowledge and start in their credit-bearing course. So I think there are a lot of creative ways that we have to explore and think outside the box to, not dismiss that shortage of knowledge, but to get it as quickly and efficiently as possible, and then get into the credit-bearing course to reduce the debt and the cost and extra tutoring as well. So hopefully that can help, and if there are some creative programs at any of your institutions in terms of how you're addressing students in those developmental courses and getting them to credit-bearing course with success. We put in some language in the bill actually that said that students are required to take the credit-bearing course in the area that they needed the development within, I think, the first semester or the first 12 or 15 courses. We don't want someone to take the development course because they fall short on AccuPlace or whatever instrument you're using, then take 3 electives, and then come back a semester, a year later, and they've forgotten it. So again, we don't want to tell you how to run your operations, but that came up as we don't want those gaps to exist. It doesn't make any sense. So we put that in the bill. Hopefully that's how it's being practiced all over the state. But the idea of taking those courses in, whether it's math or reading, English, whatever it might be, soon after the development course, as my kid used to say, duh, we have to start making sure those kind of things happen.
I agree with what Senator Pinsky said, and we can work with some of our colleagues on that. And to clarify something that was said at the beginning about the two of us being here today as 2 of the 4 education committee chairs, it's because we both chair the policy committees on the education subcommittees, and the chief co-sponsor on both of our bills on the House and Senate side were those education chairs, Delegate Bohannon and Senator Madaleno, who chaired the budget subcommittees on education. So we could certainly work with them, because that's where something like that would have to come through. But glad to work with those colleagues and others, because I think you have a great idea.
Thank you.
And I just want to take a moment to acknowledge and celebrate the exceptional work that the community colleges have already done in this area around redesigning many of the developmental mathematics courses. I see Professor Bernie Sandrick over there, who was a big part of our efforts. The state received a grant about 3 years ago, and we used about $750,000, Melinda, from that grant to redesign math courses. And we had some really positive outcomes from some of those programs. And so it doesn't take a lot of money to do what I think you were hoping to do more of. And we already have from your campuses some best practices, some promising strategies, I think some exemplary programs that could be replicated. And so I hope that there will be some additional funding available now that the grant has expired to continue that good work. But we certainly learned some valuable lessons, and we know that it doesn't always take a lot of money to make a big difference.
We have time now for the final question, and I saw the microphone going down the aisle, and I thought, not Ray Hoy, but actually it's Dr. Steve Panel, who has the honor and the privilege of doing the last question.
Thank you very much. Steve Panel, Cecil College, one of the bordering colleges among other states like Delaware and Pennsylvania. So many of the colleges and universities that we work with out of state, at a distance, and with brick and mortar colleges like the University of Delaware, Drexel, and so forth, are working with us on a 3+1 arrangement. So students can, in fact, take 90 credits through Cecil College and some of our community colleges towards a Drexel degree, a University of Delaware degree, Franklin University, which is a distance program, and others, which is a great deal for Marylanders to help them complete. So, and we also hear sometimes, well, it's a problem if students at community colleges take more than 60 credits. Those students obviously are benefiting by able to take more than 60 credits, up to 90 credits in many cases, towards a degree, and likely stay right in Maryland and participate in the local economy. So I'd ask as a future point and as a completion agenda to start thinking and discussing more 3+1 instead of 60 credits. Thank you.
And Dr. Panel, I would just ask for some advice on how we capture those students, because campuses shouldn't be dinged if a student is in a 3+1 program and has taken more than 60 credits. And so I think that there is probably a way through the data that we can collect from your campuses that we could indicate whether or not a student is in such a program, and therefore we can easily justify why that student has 80 or 90 credits. But I think that's an important part of the conversation, and it's important that everyone realize that there may be some very legitimate reasons for why students are over that 60 credit threshold. So thank you.
I'd like us all to give a warm round of applause for our panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us today, and thank you for all the good work that you do. And now Dr. Kurtinitis will come up with some instructions for the day. And again, let's give a round of applause to Dr. Kurtinitis and her staff. Thank you.
Thanks so much. We're right on time, and I'd like to add my thanks to our panelists, Dr. Howard, for really your thoughtful and intelligent leadership on how we're going to have these conversations, and certainly Senator and Delegate, you know, a lot of us in this room come from other states, and I can't tell you how happy that those of us who have come from other states are to be in Maryland. With 740, you've given us a wise assemblage of very reasonable challenges with rational expectations. And I guess I want all of you to know that when you're in a group of community college professionals such as all of us, you are among friends. We support what you're doing, we value what you're doing, and we're right behind you to make it happen. So I would like to mention two other things. We heard a lot as these conversations took place. Almost every question had some relation to accelerating remediation as a means to accelerating completion. So within that spirit, I'll just tell you two things. And actually, one is we're going to give you a gift right now, not a plaque. Don't worry. No, we're going to give all three of you a gift, because I meant to say when I gave my earlier comments that the community colleges not only take completion seriously with words, but in 2009, when all of us got together and said, we're going to do something about this, we're expected to help, we're going to help. So the projection was that by end of 2012, we would have completed, that our degrees and certificates would have increased by 17%. As of right now, using MHEC data from 2009 to 2012, we have completed just about 34% increase in degrees and certificates. So let's give ourselves a great hand. And that's a gift to all of you who work so hard to try to make us pay attention and do what we're supposed to do, and we try very hard. The other thing I want you to know, I don't think this has been announced publicly yet, but because of the great importance to this whole notion of helping students get through remediation more quickly so they can get on to the real business of completing. President Obama is actually having a White House summit next week on Wednesday, December 11, which will focus on, in fact, the whole purpose of it is really to focus on bringing college presidents, business leaders, philanthropy heads together so that this conversation about how do you connect speeding or increasing the ability for students to get through remediation barriers so they can move on to completion. And it's so important, not only to us in our state, but to all states, that the president is bringing that kind of leadership to it. So with that, let me give you a couple of housekeeping details that I think you will find useful in making your way around our campus. First, I need to say to you, we have some pretty heavy construction going on just across the road. And of course, that's with many thanks to our state and county legislators, because mathematics and science building is going to grow out of the mess that's there now, mud and mayhem, of course. So please, as you leave here, just look for the public safety folks at the crossroads. They'll kind of point you along the way. We have a lot of people dressed in Maryland flag colors, just like me, who are going to be out there to help lead you to the locations, and also there will be folks in those sessions who will then help you find your way to the next item, which after the first workshops would be a very important one, and that is lunch. So then we are not coming back here again. The second round of workshops will take place, and then you will just depart filled and inspired with all that you will have heard today. So since we won't reconvene again, I will just say again, thank you to our guests, thank you to our MACC staff, and to Dr. Hetherington, who always leads us with a sort of soft and intelligent way. So we send you on your way now, and let me just make sure. Joan, did I say everything? There will... Shuttles. Yes, we have shuttles as well, and they will be parked right out front. So please enjoy, have a good experience, and we'll see you at lunch. Thanks.